Cal Newport is a Georgetown computer science professor. Roy Baumeister is one of the most cited psychologists alive. Newport built deep work on Baumeister's famous ego depletion theory, the idea that willpower is a finite resource that runs out like a battery. Baumeister's research had been replicated hundreds of times. Then in 2016, something happened. A massive replication study with 2,000 participants found nothing. The theory collapsed. So what happens to deep work when its scientific foundation crumbles? I tested every major claim against the actual research. Here's what survived and what didn't. The bookend author. Deep Work came out in 2016 and immediately became a productivity Bible. Cal Newport isn't your typical self-help guru. He's a tenured professor of computer science at Georgetown University. He's published peer-reviewed papers. He has a PhD from MIT. And his argument was simple but powerful. In an economy where everyone is distracted, the ability to focus deeply is becoming both rare and valuable. Master it, and you have an unfair advantage. The book sold over 2 million copies. Companies started implementing deep work hours. People deleted social media accounts. It became a movement. The book's promise. Newport's core promise is this: if you can regularly enter a state of distraction-free concentration, you will produce work at a level most people can't match. He backs this up with what sounds like solid science, theories about how your brain works, research on attention and willpower, studies on elite performers. He gives you specific strategies: time blocking, quitting social media, ritualized deep work sessions, designing your environment for focus. It all sounds compelling, but here's the question nobody asks. Is the science actually right? Book Lab's promise. That's exactly what I did. I went through Deep Work and identified the 7 major scientific claims Newport uses to build his argument. Then I tracked down the original studies, checked if they'd been replicated, looked for meta-analyses, found what happened to these theories since the book was published. The result? Just under 60% of the science holds up. 2 claims are rock solid. You can use them with confidence. 4 need serious nuance, and 1 completely collapsed. We're going to go through all of it. But let's start with the good news, because Newport actually got his most actionable claim completely right. It's called attention residue, and if you understand this one concept, you'll immediately know why your current way of working is destroying your performance. Topic 1. Attention residue. What the book says. Newport makes a bold claim early in Deep Work. Every time you switch tasks, you pay a hidden tax. He calls it attention residue. Here's the idea. When you're working on task A and you switch to task B, even briefly, your attention doesn't fully come with you. Part of your mind is still stuck on task A. You're thinking about that unfinished email, that half-written report, that Slack message you didn't respond to. And this residue, Newport argues, sabotages your performance on the new task. This is why checking your phone for just a second is so dangerous. It's not the 5 seconds you lose. It's the attention residue that lingers for minutes, sometimes longer, after you put the phone down. Newport uses this to justify his entire philosophy. You need long, uninterrupted blocks of time, because every interruption leaves a residue that degrades your cognitive performance. It sounds intuitive. But is it actually true? What science says. This is one of the few claims where Newport absolutely nailed it. The concept comes from Sophie Leroy, a researcher at the University of Minnesota. In 2009, she published a study in Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes that coined the term attention residue. Here's what she found. When people switched from task A to task B without completing task A, they performed significantly worse on task B. Their minds were literally split. Part of their cognitive resources were still allocated to the unfinished task. But here's the critical detail. The effect was strongest when people knew they'd have to return to the unfinished task under time pressure. That anticipation created even more residue. Leroy didn't stop there. In follow-up studies in 2016 and 2018, she and her colleagues replicated the effect and found something useful. Writing down where you stopped on task A, a simple task progression note, actually reduced the residue. The science here is solid. Multiple replications, consistent findings, clear mechanism. This is textbook good psychology research. When you switch tasks, you pay a real cognitive cost. Newport got this one completely right. Verdict: validated. Attention residue is real, measurable, and probably affecting you right now. Every time you quickly check your email in the middle of writing something important, you're not just losing those few seconds, you're fragmenting your attention, and it takes time, sometimes 10, 15, 20 minutes, to fully return to the deep focus you had before. So, what do you do with this? 3 practical applications based on the research. First, batch your shallow work. Don't scatter email checks throughout your day. Group them into 2 or 3 dedicated windows. This minimizes the number of attention residue events. Second, when you must switch tasks before finishing, use Leroy's trick. Take 30 seconds to write down exactly where you stopped and what your next step is. This gives your brain permission to let go. Third, protect your deep work blocks ruthlessly. Every interruption isn't just a time cost, it's a cognitive cost that compounds. A 4-hour block with 3 interruptions isn't 3 hours of deep work. It might be closer to 1. This is Newport at his best, identifying a real phenomenon backed by solid science and translating it into actionable strategy. But not everything in the book holds up this well. Let's look at what happens when we examine his claims about willpower. Topic 2. Ego depletion, what the book says. Now we get to the claim that made me question everything else in this book. Newport argues that willpower is like a battery. Every time you resist a distraction, every time you force yourself to focus when you'd rather check Twitter, you drain that battery a little more. This is why, he says, the afternoon feels so hard. You've been depleting your willpower all day. By 3 p.m., the battery is nearly empty. The solution? Don't rely on willpower at all. Design your environment so you don't need to resist temptation. Block distracting websites, put your phone in another room. Remove the need for self-control entirely. This sounds brilliant, and honestly, the practical advice is good. But here's the problem. The entire theory is built on research by Roy Baumeister, one of the most cited psychologists in the world. His theory of ego depletion was replicated hundreds of times. It was in every psychology textbook. It was considered settled science, and then it collapsed. What science says. In 2016, the same year Deep Work was published, something remarkable happened. 23 laboratories around the world ran a coordinated replication of Baumeister's ego depletion experiments. Same protocols, same measures. Over 2,100 participants. The result? The effect was essentially zero. Statistical noise. Nothing. But maybe that was a fluke, so in 2021 they did it again. This time 36 laboratories, over 3,500 participants. The study was even led by Kathleen Vose, one of Baumeister's own collaborators. The result? The effect was 10 times smaller than originally claimed. Practically meaningless. Here's a quote from Michael Inslicht, a researcher who actually won awards for his work on ego depletion. He tried to replicate his own studies. Over and over I tried. Over and over I failed. That's when I became convinced. Ego depletion, at least as typically studied in the lab, was a mirage. This isn't a minor correction. This is one of the most dramatic failures in modern psychology, a theory that was cited thousands of times, taught in every university, built into best-selling books, and it simply wasn't true. Willpower probably doesn't work like a battery that drains throughout the day. The foundation Newport built his argument on? It crumbled. Verdict: not validated. The theory of ego depletion has essentially collapsed. But here's what's fascinating. Newport's practical advice still works, just not for the reasons he thinks. When you put your phone in another room, you're not preserving willpower. You're reducing attention residue and eliminating decision points. When you block distracting websites, you're not saving your battery. You're using what behavioral economists call choice architecture, making the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder. When you design your environment for focus, you're leveraging a different body of research entirely, one that's actually well replicated. So what do you do with this? First, stop beating yourself up for running out of willpower in the afternoon. That's probably not what's happening. You might be bored. You might need a break. You might need better task design. Second, still use environment design. It works. Just understand that you're reducing friction and cognitive load, not preserving a finite resource. Third, be skeptical when any book tells you the science is settled. Psychology has a replication crisis. What seems certain today might collapse tomorrow. Newport identified a real problem. Constant distraction destroys deep work. His solution, environment design, is valid. He just built it on a scientific foundation that turned out to be sand. Speaking of shaky foundations, let's look at another claim Newport makes, that you can only do about 4 hours of deep work per day. Topic 3. The 4-hour limit. What the book says. Here's a claim that sounds almost too specific to be true. Newport says beginners can only manage about 1 hour of deep work per day. With practice, you can build up to 4 hours. But rarely, if ever, can anyone sustain more than 4 hours of truly focused, cognitively demanding work. He backs this up with examples. Famous writers who worked 4 hours in the morning, professors who protected their morning blocks, Darwin, who did his most important thinking before lunch. It's a comforting idea, actually. You don't need to grind for 12 hours. You just need 4 really good ones. But Newport doesn't cite any actual studies for this number. It's based on anecdotes, successful people who happened to work this way. So I went looking for the science. Is there really a 4-hour cognitive limit, or is this just survivor bias dressed up as wisdom? What science says? The answer is, it's complicated. A 2023 study of medical students tracked 411 self-reports of mental fatigue. They found that working more than 4 hours on mentally demanding tasks led to increased fatigue the next day, and that fatigue accumulated across days. Another study from the same year looked at office workers doing continuous cognitive tasks. After just 60 minutes of intense mental work, subjective fatigue kicked in. And here's the key finding. Even after 4.5 hours of rest, cognitive function didn't fully recover. The Whitehall 2 study followed over 2,200 civil servants for 5 years. Those working more than 55 hours per week showed lower cognitive test scores and declining reasoning ability over time. So yes, there are real limits. Your brain isn't a machine that can run at full capacity indefinitely. But here's what the research also shows. There's no magic number. Individual differences are enormous. The type of task matters. High complexity work might max out at 2 to 3 hours, while medium intensity work can go longer. Sleep, health, nutrition, age, and even neurodiversity all affect your personal ceiling. 4 hours isn't a universal law. It's a rough average that might not apply to you at all. Verdict: partially validated. Newport is right that cognitive limits exist. You can't do deep work for 8 hours straight. Your brain will rebel. But 4 hours is too specific. The real range is probably 2 to 6 hours depending on who you are and what you're doing. Here's what actually matters. First, Discover your own limit. Track your energy and output for a few weeks. When does your focus genuinely drop? When do you start producing garbage? That's your ceiling, not some number from a book. Second, match task intensity to time of day. Your highest complexity work should happen during your peak hours. For most people, that's morning. Save administrative tasks and email for when your brain is already tired. Third, respect the fade. When you notice your focus declining, don't fight it with caffeine and willpower. That's your brain telling you it needs recovery. Take a real break, a walk, a nap, something completely different. Pushing through usually produces worse work that you'll have to redo anyway. The takeaway isn't work exactly 4 hours. It's work with your cognitive limits, not against them. Now, Newport doesn't just talk about how long you can focus. He also makes claims about where you should focus, and his take on open offices might be the most well-supported argument in the entire book. Topic 4. Open offices. What the book says. If you work in an open office, you already know something is wrong. You can feel it, the constant background noise, the movement in your peripheral vision, the colleague who taps your shoulder every 15 minutes with a quick question. Newport argues that open offices are a disaster for deep work. They were sold as creativity boosters, tear down the walls, increase collaboration, let ideas flow. Silicon Valley loved them. Then everyone copied them. But Newport says the real reason companies use open offices isn't productivity, it's cost. You can fit more people into less space. The collaboration story is just marketing, and he claims the research backs him up. Open offices destroy focus, increase stress, and actually make collaboration worse, not better. This is a bold claim, especially since most knowledge workers are still stuck in open plans. So, is Newport right? Or is he just giving voice to something we all want to believe? What science says. This is Newport at his strongest. The evidence here is overwhelming. A systematic review from 2021 analyzed 31 studies comparing open plan and private offices. The findings were brutal. Health, worse in every study. Higher stress, higher blood pressure, more sick days. Satisfaction, lower across the board. People in open offices were less happy with their environment, less satisfied with their jobs, and more likely to quit. Productivity. Self-reported productivity dropped. Distractions increased. Privacy vanished. But here's the finding that should have killed the open office trend forever. Harvard Business School tracked a company that switched from cubicles to open plan. They didn't rely on surveys. They used electronic badges and microphones to objectively measure interaction. The result? Face-to-face collaboration didn't increase. It dropped by 73%. Meanwhile, email usage went up 67%. People didn't collaborate more. They retreated into their headphones and screens because that was the only way to get any privacy. Gloria Mark at UC Irvine found that the average office worker is interrupted every 11 minutes, and it takes up to 23 minutes to fully refocus. Do the math. You might never reach deep focus at all. 76% of workers in one survey said they hate open offices. The reasons: lack of privacy, difficulty concentrating, inability to do their best thinking. Newport is completely right. Open offices are a productivity disaster dressed up as a culture win. Verdict: validated. This is one of the most well-supported claims in the entire book. The science is clear. Open offices reduce productivity, increase stress, harm health, and, ironically, actually decrease the collaboration they were designed to promote. Companies keep using them because they're cheap, not because they work. So what do you do if you're stuck in one? First, fight for focus zones. If you have any influence over your workspace, push for designated quiet areas. Research shows that hybrid layouts, with both collaborative and focused spaces, dramatically improve satisfaction and output. Second, create portable privacy. Noise-canceling headphones aren't just nice to have. They're survival equipment. Use them as a signal that you're in focus mode. Some teams use physical flags or lights to show when someone shouldn't be interrupted. Third, escape when it matters. For your most important deep work, find somewhere else. A conference room, a coffee shop, work from home if you can. Don't try to do cognitively demanding work in an environment designed to prevent it. The open office isn't your fault, but protecting your focus is your responsibility. Now, we've looked at environment, but Newport also makes claims about what you should do during your deep work sessions, specifically that you can train your attention like a muscle. Let's see if that holds up. Topic 5. Attention training. What the book says. Newport makes an appealing claim. Your ability to focus is like a muscle. Train it and it gets stronger. Neglect it and it atrophies. He argues that modern life, constant notifications, infinite scrolling, the dopamine slot machine in your pocket, has weakened our collective attention span. We've trained ourselves to be distracted. But here's the good news. According to Newport, you can reverse it. Through practices like meditation, memorization, and regular deep work sessions, you can rebuild your attention capacity. You can train yourself to tolerate boredom instead of reaching for your phone. You can strengthen your ability to focus on one thing for extended periods. It's an empowering idea. You're not permanently broken by social media. You can train your way back to deep focus. But there's a problem with this metaphor. Your brain isn't actually a muscle, and attention doesn't quite work the way biceps do. So what does the research say about training attention? What science says? The science here is genuinely mixed. Let's start with what works. Meditation and mindfulness training do improve attention. That's well documented across multiple studies. Regular meditators show better sustained attention, improved attention control, and modest gains in working memory. Brain imaging studies even show structural changes, increased gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, and alterations in attention networks. So far, so good for Newport. But here's where it gets complicated. Transfer effects. When you train a specific attention task, you get better at that specific task. Meditators get better at meditation. People who practice focus exercises improve on those exercises. The problem is transferring those gains to other activities. What scientists call far transfer, taking improvements from one domain and applying them to completely different tasks, is inconsistent at best. Working memory training shows the same pattern. Train your working memory with specific exercises and you'll improve on those exercises. But the transfer to real-world cognitive tasks, limited and unreliable. The attention as muscle metaphor breaks down here. When you train your biceps, they're stronger for everything, lifting groceries, opening jars, throwing a ball. But attention training doesn't generalize the same way. Newport is right that attention can improve with practice. But he oversimplifies how that improvement works and overstates how broadly it transfers. Verdict: partially validated. You can improve your attention. That part is true. But the muscle metaphor is misleading. Attention training is more domain-specific than Newport suggests, and the effects are more modest than the book implies. Here's what actually works based on the research. First, meditation helps, but set realistic expectations. Regular mindfulness practice does improve focus, but we're talking about small to medium effects that take weeks or months to develop. It's not a quick fix. 10 minutes a day for 3 months is more realistic than expecting transformation in a week. Second, practice focus in your actual domain. Instead of generic attention training, practice deep focus on the specific work you care about. A programmer should practice focused coding. A writer should practice focused writing. Domain-specific practice transfers better than abstract exercises. Third, reduce stimulation. Don't just resist it. Newport talks about training yourself to tolerate boredom. There's some logic here. Constant stimulation probably does create dependency, but it's easier to reduce exposure than to white-knuckle your way through cravings. Delete the apps. Use website blockers. Make distraction harder, not willpower stronger. The takeaway: yes, attention can improve, but it's not as simple as doing mental push-ups. Focus on reducing distractions and practicing sustained attention in your actual work, not on generic brain training. Now, there's one more piece of Newport's advice we need to examine, and it's his most controversial recommendation. He doesn't just say, reduce distractions. He says, quit social media entirely. Delete your accounts. Walk away. Is that actually necessary? Or is Newport being extreme about something that requires more nuance? Topic 6. Quit social media. What the book says. Now we get to Newport's most controversial advice. He doesn't say, use social media less. He doesn't say, be more intentional. He says, quit. Delete your accounts. Walk away entirely. Newport argues that most people use what he calls the any benefit mindset. If a tool offers any possible benefit, they adopt it without considering the costs. Social media might help you stay connected with old friends. It might surface interesting articles. It might help your career. But Newport says these minor benefits aren't worth the massive cost, the constant fragmentation of your attention, the dopamine-driven compulsion to check notifications, the erosion of your ability to focus deeply on anything. His solution is radical. Apply the craftsman approach instead. Only adopt a tool if its benefits substantially outweigh its costs for the things you value most. For most people, he argues, social media fails this test. It's a compelling argument, but is quitting entirely really necessary? Or is Newport being absolutist about something that actually requires nuance? What science says. The science here is interesting. It partially supports Newport, but not his most extreme conclusion. A 2023 study from Ruhr University Bochum in Germany tested what happens when people reduce their social media use. Not eliminate, just reduce. Participants cut their usage by just 30 minutes per day for 1 week. The results? Improved mental health, higher job satisfaction, greater work commitment in just 7 days. Another study from the same year found that restricting social media to 30 minutes daily, not 0, just limited, reduced smartphone addiction, improved well-being, enhanced relationships, and lowered stress levels. So, reduction works. What about total elimination? Here's where it gets complicated. The research consistently shows benefits from using less social media. But there's very little evidence that quitting entirely is better than moderate, intentional use. In fact, some research shows the opposite. For certain professionals, marketers, networkers, creators, social media provides real career benefits. The network effects are genuine. Complete abstinence has costs too. The science also distinguishes between different types of use. Using social media for work purposes can actually increase productivity and job satisfaction. It's the mindless scrolling, the social comparison, the constant checking that causes problems. Newport treats social media as binary. You're either on it or off it. But the research suggests the real issue is how you use it, not whether you use it at all. Verdict: partially validated. Newport is right that social media fragments attention and can harm productivity. He's right that most people use it mindlessly. He's right that the costs often exceed the benefits. But quit entirely is oversimplified. The science supports reduction and intentional use, not necessarily total elimination. Here's what actually works based on the research. First, reduce before you quit. Try cutting your usage by 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. That's it. The Ruhr University study showed measurable benefits from just this small change. You might find that's enough. Second, separate work use from social use. If social media genuinely serves your professional goals, networking, marketing, industry awareness, that's different from scrolling Instagram during your lunch break. Keep the former, eliminate the latter. Third, schedule it like email. Newport's own advice about email applies here. Don't check social media throughout the day. Batch it into specific windows, maybe once in the morning, once in the evening. This captures benefits while minimizing attention fragmentation. Fourth, be honest about your reasons. If you're arguing that you need social media for your career, make sure that's actually true. Newport's critique of the any benefit mindset is valid. We often overestimate benefits and underestimate costs. The takeaway, Newport identified a real problem, but the solution isn't necessarily cold turkey. Intentional reduction might work just as well or better than complete elimination. But here's the thing, we've spent this whole video testing Newport's claims. Some work, some don't, some need nuance. But there's a bigger question nobody asks. Who can actually follow any of this advice? Topic 7, Privilege and Autonomy, what the book says. Now I need to talk about something Newport never really addresses. Throughout Deep Work, he gives advice like, block 4 hours on your calendar for uninterrupted focus. Don't check email until noon. Say no to meetings that don't serve your priorities. Quit social media entirely. And he makes it sound simple. Just do it. Decide that deep work matters, restructure your day, and watch your output transform. But here's the question nobody asks. Who actually has the power to do any of this? Newport is a tenured professor at Georgetown University. He controls his own schedule. He can ignore emails for hours, sometimes days, without consequences. He can say no to requests. He can close his door and disappear into focused work whenever he wants. That level of autonomy, it's not normal. It's not even close to normal, and the book rarely acknowledges this. Newport writes as if everyone has the structural freedom to implement his strategies, as if just block your calendar is equally available to a senior professor and a customer service representative. It's not. What science says. This isn't really a scientific claim, it's a blind spot. But research on workplace autonomy makes the problem clear. The majority of workers don't control their own schedules. Customer service roles require constant responsiveness. That's literally the job. Healthcare workers face interruptions that are inevitable and critical. Many knowledge workers are explicitly evaluated on how quickly they respond to messages. Managers are expected to be available. Entry-level employees have almost no control over their time. Even in supposedly flexible jobs, there are hidden expectations. The colleague who needs something urgent, the boss who expects replies within an hour, the culture that treats slow email response as a character flaw. And here's what makes this worse. The ability to do deep work isn't distributed equally. Research on workplace dynamics shows that women, people of color, and junior employees often face higher expectations for responsiveness and office housework, the administrative tasks and emotional labor that fragment attention. Saying no to requests has different consequences depending on your position, your demographics, and your job security. Newport's strategies require structural power, the power to close your door, the power to ignore requests, the power to protect your time without being punished for it. Not everyone has that power, and the book doesn't acknowledge this. Verdict: this is a valid criticism, not of the science, but of the book's assumptions. Newport's strategies work if you have autonomy, but for many people, implementing them could damage relationships, hurt their reputation, or even cost them their job. This doesn't mean deep work is impossible if you're not a tenured professor, but it means you need to adapt the strategies to your actual situation. Here's how to think about it. First, audit your real autonomy. Before trying to implement Newport's advice, honestly assess what you actually control. Can you block time without permission? Can you delay email responses without consequences? Can you say no to meetings? Know your constraints before fighting them. Second, find the margins. Even in highly responsive jobs, there are usually small pockets of protected time. Early morning before others wake up. A lunch break you can reclaim. The first hour after everyone else leaves. Start there. Don't try to restructure a schedule you don't control. Third, negotiate incrementally. If you want more autonomy, build a case over time. Deliver exceptional work during your focused periods. Show that protecting your attention produces better results. Use that evidence to negotiate for more deep work time. This takes months, not days. And finally, don't blame yourself. If your job genuinely doesn't allow for deep work, that's a structural problem, not a personal failure. Some jobs are designed around constant interruption. Recognizing that is the first step toward either changing your situation or accepting its limits. Now, let's bring this all together. What's the final verdict on deep work? Verdict recap. So, let's bring it all together. We tested 7 major claims from deep work against peer-reviewed research. Here's what we found. Attention residue, the idea that switching tasks leaves cognitive residue that hurts performance, validated. Sophie Leroy's research holds up. This is real and you should structure your work around it. Ego depletion, the theory that willpower drains like a battery, not validated. This was one of the biggest replication failures in modern psychology. 36 labs, thousands of participants, essentially no effect. The foundation collapsed. The 4-hour limit on deep work, partially validated. Cognitive limits are real, but 4 hours is too specific. Your limit might be 2 hours or 6. It depends on you, the task, and a dozen other factors. Open offices destroying productivity, validated. This is one of the most well-supported claims in the book. The research is overwhelming. Open offices reduce focus, increase stress, and ironically decrease the collaboration they were designed to promote. Training attention like a muscle, partially validated. You can improve your focus, but it doesn't transfer as broadly as Newport suggests. Domain-specific practice works better than generic brain training. Quitting social media entirely, partially validated. Reduction works. The science is clear on that. But there's little evidence that total elimination is better than intentional, scheduled use. And finally, the privilege problem. Newport's strategies require autonomy that most workers simply don't have. This isn't a scientific claim. It's a structural blind spot in the book. So, what's the final score? Of the 7 claims we tested, 2 were fully validated, 1 completely failed, and 4 need significant nuance. That gives deep work a validation rate of about 57%. Now, that might sound mediocre, but here's the important part. The claims that work are highly actionable. Attention residue and open office research give you concrete strategies you can implement today. And many of Newport's practical recommendations, environment design, time blocking, reducing distractions, still work, even when his scientific explanations don't. The book's biggest problem isn't that it's wrong. It's that it built part of its argument on ego depletion, a theory that collapsed after publication, and it assumes a level of workplace autonomy that most people don't have. Here's my honest take. Deep Work is a useful book that oversells its scientific foundation. The core insight that focused work is valuable and increasingly rare is correct. Many of the strategies work, but the why behind them is sometimes wrong, and the who can do this is rarely addressed. Use what works, ignore what doesn't, and adapt everything to your actual situation. Now let me give you a concrete plan for doing exactly that. 30-day action plan. Here's your 30-day plan to implement what actually works from Deep Work. Every strategy here is based on validated science, nothing from the claims that failed. Week 1. Audit and reduce. Start by understanding your reality. Track how you currently spend your work hours for 3 days. Note every interruption, every task switch, every time you check your phone or email. Then make one change. Reduce your social media use by 30 minutes per day. That's it. Don't quit entirely, just cut back. The Ruhr University study showed measurable benefits from this single change in just 1 week. By the end of week 1, you'll know your patterns and have started reducing your biggest attention drain. Week 2, batch and block. Now, attack attention residue directly. Group your shallow work, email, messages, administrative tasks into 2 or 3 dedicated windows per day. Check email at 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 5 p.m., not in between. When you finish a task or need to switch, take 30 seconds to write down exactly where you stopped and what your next step is. This is Sophie Leroy's technique for clearing attention residue. It works. By the end of week 2, you'll have dramatically reduced your daily task switching. Week 3, protect and escape. Create your focus environment. If you're in an open office, get noise-canceling headphones and use them as a do not disturb signal. Find one place, a conference room, a coffee shop, a corner of your home, where you can do focused work without interruption. Block 90 minutes on your calendar each day for deep work. Treat it like a meeting you can't cancel. Start with your most cognitively demanding task during this block. By the end of week 3, you'll have a protected daily window for your most important work. Week 4, calibrate and sustain. Discover your personal limit. Track your energy and output during deep work sessions. When does your focus genuinely fade? That's your ceiling, not some number from a book. Create a shutdown ritual. At the end of each workday, review what you accomplished. Write tomorrow's priorities and say out loud, "Shutdown complete." This signals your brain that work is done. By the end of week 4, you'll have a sustainable deep work practice tailored to your actual life, not a tenured professor's. That's the plan. 4 weeks, based purely on what the science actually supports. Conclusion. So here's my question for you. Which of these strategies will you implement first? Will you start tracking your attention patterns? Batch your email into dedicated windows? Find a quiet space for focused work? Create a shutdown ritual? You don't need to do everything. Pick one thing from the plan and commit to it for 1 week. That's how sustainable change actually works. Not through dramatic overhauls, but through small, validated steps. Deep Work isn't a perfect book. It built part of its argument on a theory that collapsed. It assumes privileges many people don't have, and some of its advice is more extreme than the science supports. But the core insight is real. In a world of constant distraction, the ability to focus deeply is genuinely valuable. And now you know which strategies are actually backed by evidence, and which ones you can safely ignore. Don't just read about deep work. Do the work. Start this week. Next up, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for his research on how we think and make decisions. His book has sold millions of copies and shaped how we understand the human mind. But here's the thing, even Nobel Prize winners aren't immune to the replication crisis. Some of his most famous findings have been challenged in recent years. So does Thinking Fast and Slow hold up? I tested every major claim, and one more thing, Kahneman would say, you used your System 2 brain to watch this whole video. Your System 1 wanted to scroll. You didn't. That's deep work in action. If you want more books tested against real science, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every video on this channel takes claims from best-selling books and checks them against peer-reviewed research, so you know what actually works. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.